to the Movies to Watch Before You Die podcast. I am Dylan here with my co-host Gab, and we are going to talk about another movie. This time it was your pick.
Yes, yes. And upon rewatching, I realized it is in fact one of my favorite Tom Hanks movies. I'm sorry. Top 5.
That's a big statement, I feel like, because Tom Hanks is such a legendary actor, and quite frankly, I've never seen him play, I don't think, a sleazier character than I feel like he does in this movie.
I know.
And he's still not that bad, but I guess that's because Tom Hanks is just so likable.
Yeah, for sure. But I think it is such a great movie, and it's so and obviously we'll get into more detail, but I just think like Tom Hanks is so lovable and wonderful, but this movie has all the best parts of Tom Hanks without it focusing on Tom Hanks, you know?
Well, it does feel like the main character of this movie, which I think the actor's name is like Tom Everett Scott.
Should we introduce the movie first?
Yes, I guess maybe I should, because last time it was my pick and I had you introduce it. So maybe I should say we're talking about That Thing You Do, which I think is 1996 or 1997.
Correct.
1996. And it is basically the story of a band who has one successful song that they ran into the ground.
Yeah.
And I thought that this was perfectly fine in the briefest, much in the way that you felt about like Raiders of the Lost Ark. I was like, oh, I don't think I'm definitely not as into this as she is. I was like, it's fine.
That's so funny.
Boy, should I go right off the bat into problems I have with this thing?
Yeah, please. That's what this is all about. Let's go. Hit me with them.
Obviously, spoilers. Okay, so I feel like first and foremost, this movie is at least a half hour longer than it needs to be.
I'll give you that. Okay.
And it's never unpleasant. I was never watching it. I was like, this is terrible. But there are times where I was watching and I was like, nothing is happening. I was like, something major needs to happen. There needs to be some conflict. And there, you almost never get to a point of like real conflict within the band. It's just like people sort of get disinterested in things.
Yeah.
Like at one point, Ethan Embry's character, the bassist, just like runs off with some Marines. And I was like, okay. Like, you didn't even have a scene where they like confront him about him. They're pissed. And he was like, you knew I was leaving anyway. I was like, oh, okay. He's done.
Yeah.
All right. And I sort of felt that way. Like it was what a cast the movie has. And I made all these notes while I was watching it. And like one of the first things I said as the opening credits were going, I wrote in my notes, I was like, what a cast. And as excited as I was to see Charlize Theron, she is so unnecessary for this movie. There is no point to having her in this.
I disagree. And we're going to talk about, that's actually what I want to talk about. But anyway, continue.
Yeah, I felt like her and the dentist. I was like, first of all, this guy shouldn't be buying for a second that she's like, I got to spend all day at the dentist. I was like, he's filling more than cavities if she's spending all day.
Whoa, ayo.
Just saying.
Yeah, and he was. That is correct.
Also, I just have a really hard time watching Liv Tyler in anything. I don't think she's a very good actress. She's a bit wooden. I wish we could have swapped Liv Tyler and Charlize Theron.
Yeah.
Like which characters they were playing, because I feel like Charlize Theron would have given the better performance probably.
Yeah. You know, it's funny. I was just talking about this movie with my boss. We actually had a conversation about our favorite Tom Hanks movies, and I threw this one in there and he was kind of surprised. And he actually said, he was kind of running down the list, and we talked about Steve Zahn, which obviously we need to talk about. And he said, and Liv Tyler was great. And I thought to myself, Liv Tyler is probably the least likable character in that whole movie.
And the movie is trying to make her likable. Like, she is nothing but supportive, but she is just so uncharismatic. And it's how I feel about her in everything. Like, That Thing You Do to me is that thing that Liv Tyler does is nothing. Like, I'm like,
right.
She is it may as well have been a mannequin. Because I'm like, okay, you're there.
I'm going to ask you a dumb question publicly on our podcast. Is that Steven Tyler's daughter?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much.
Which is so interesting. Question. It could have been somebody else, but she also has like, they both have those giant mouths also.
Yes.
Like, I feel like Steven Tyler has like the biggest mouth in the world.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely could have Googled that before we had this conversation. But what I do think is interesting is that he's very expressive, and like, obviously he's like kind of wild, and she like, it's so surprising to me that that's her daughter who's like, oh.
In a non-plastic surgery way, the top half of her face does not move.
Right. Yeah.
She just does not show any emotion at all. And you know who is, you brought him up. Steve Zahn is just delightful.
Oh, man.
This whole movie, I wrote down several times. I was like, Steve Zahn's great.
So
Like he
great.
just has so many times where he says something. I was like, oh, Steve Zahn. Like even the last time you see him when he is at the chapel with the woman he like just met, and he's like, I'm so happy. I was like, oh, at least he's happy.
Yes, I love him. He's great. He's great. That character is great. Like so many great lines from him. And it really rounds out, I think, the band, like in the, within the context of the movie to have like such a lovable, carefree, because I think first of all, I love that the bass player doesn't have a name. I think that's so great. But he is sort of like kind of in the like limbo between being like someone who's smart and has direction in their life and someone who's like kind of a bumbling idiot. But I think Steve Zahn's character just really drives that home with like, I am just empty on the inside.
Oh my god! Wow, that was a dark description of Steve Zahn's character, who is so happy-go-lucky. Um, do they not give the bassist a name? I think
His
they.
name, his name in the credits is literally TB player, the bass player.
Oh my god! Because I was gonna say, I was like, there was initials at the end. Was it like TJ or something? And I'm like, oh no, he is the
No.
bass player, which to me is not like. It almost just feels lazy. I'm like, just make him George or something. I don't know. Like,
Oh, I think it's hilarious that he just doesn't have a name. Like
I
nobody just
guess
acknowledges him.
I do feel like Steve Zahn was just like the. I don't want to say the heart, because I think the heart, I guess, was Shades. Well, what is he?
Mhm.
Shades, Skitch, and Guy? Is it Skitch or something like that?
I don't remember. Shades is like his sort of like band pseudonym, but his name is Guy Patterson.
Which, yes, I remember he was Guy Patterson. It was all the nicknames that I was like, why are they calling him that? Like, I was like,
Yeah.
where the hell does Shades come from? Tom Hanks is just like, you're Shades now. I was like, why?
Yeah, that was a very quick jump to like, all right, now you're Shades. So let's give a quick overview of the movie because there's a very specific concept that I want to talk about. Um I think you could explain this movie, and I'm sure everybody listening has heard of it or watched it. It is essentially the story of a one hit wonder band, right? Like they have a single, it goes crazy. They go from playing their local bowling alley to the state fair to live on television. They're on the radio. The song is like a number one, and then eventually they just kind of fall apart. And it's sort of the story of the relationships, I think, as that happens.
Yes. And it is 100% that, and it is done in a very straightforward, linear way. And I don't mean that as a disservice. It's just, I literally watched Elvis a few days before I watched this. And Elvis, I don't know if you saw it, is just this, it's filled with kinetic energy and montages. And it's just like they turned everything up to 11 for almost no reason. And they still end up hopping around between certain events in such a quick fashion. Whereas this was very much, we skipped no letters of the alphabet, I feel like, on this journey.
Yeah.
You know
Yeah,
what I mean? The only
for
thing,
sure.
it's sometimes a disservice though, because sometimes I'm like, I don't need to see this. I don't need to see them play 8 state fairs. Show me 2 state fairs or do a montage of state fairs and then have them move on to something else.
Yeah.
You know, maybe we don't need to see the first manager and the meeting in the RV. Maybe it can just be Tom Hanks the first time who like notices them because he's a talent scout as well as a manager or something like that.
Sure, sure.
And you know what character? Another character who I'm like, there is no reason for you to be in this movie. Giovanni Ribisi, who again is an actor that I was like, "Ooh, Giovanni Ribisi's in this." And
Yeah,
then I
yeah.
literally wrote down at one point, I was like, "What's happened to Giovanni Ribisi? Where did he go?" And then a
Well, I
scene later,
think
he did show up again to like take out the help wanted sign, and I was like, "Okay." He's a very good sport about the fact that he is the Pete Best of this situation.
yeah. I mean, yeah, for sure. But I love, I mean, the purpose of Guy joining the band. And by the way, Guy is the reason that they made it because he sped up That Thing You Do. It was supposed to be a
Yes,
ballad.
they were like, "This is too fast."
Is because Giovanni Ribisi fell and broke his arm.
Yeah,
And so had that not happened, Guy wouldn't have joined the band. They wouldn't have gone, gotten as popular as they did. But also, I think it's so funny that the father was so unsupportive of Guy and then like hired Giovanni Ribisi to be his replacement. And then they like he was having family dinner with them. Like, I think that's
I was
hilarious.
gonna bring that up. I found it so funny that at one point you see he's just there, and like they don't mention at all why he's at home with them watching television. I was like, is he dating the daughter now? No, I guess he's just there.
He's just part of the family. He's the son now. He runs the store with them.
I
But
did feel
anyway,
like though the parents did get supportive. Like they were
yeah.
watching on TV and they were like, "Way to go, guy!" And the parents kind of reminded me of. Have you ever seen the movie Breaking Away?
No.
It's a great like coming of age movie, and the dad the entire time is, making fun of his son who wants to be a cyclist, Lance Armstrong type guy. And you do feel that as much as the dad is harsh with him, you never sense that he doesn't love him.
Okay.
And that's how I felt about this movie. I was like, the dad's kind of a jerk at times, like shut the lights off, but you never feel that he is against Guy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which
right.
again, it's like maybe that would have been a good thing to have, because at times I felt like I was like, there's no conflict.
Yeah. Well, there are two things that I want to talk about. The first is not going to take that long. I want to discuss the fact that that song is such a perfect song. Like, it's chemically addicting. I've been singing it nonstop for days. Just can't get it out of my head. And I think what they do in the movie really well is they play the song enough, but not so much that you're like, I never want to hear this again for the rest of my life. And they choose like good bits and pieces here and there. And it does get stuck in your head and you're like, oh, and you're dancing to it, but it's never too much, I think.
It is very much a Beatles, Herman Hermits, very type of 60s perfect bubblegum type song. Like I could definitely see this being a real song from that time period.
Mm-hmm.
And I definitely did enjoy the song, and they do a good job they probably played the song like 12 to 15 times in the movie, but maybe only fully like the first time. And then it'll just be like a chorus here or a bridge there. And it does a good job of that for sure. But at a certain point, I did feel like, what was his name? The jerk? Jimmy? Which I feel bad describing as the jerk, because he was just like, can we record another song, please? And they were like, no, later. Like at some point I was like, no, Jimmy's kind of right. Like we should have like a third song. He was like, we did one song, one take of another song and nothing else. Which I will say, at least Jimmy does sort of get what he wants at the end.
Mm-hmm.
It does that like Animal House end credits thing of being like, and here's what happened to the characters. And
yeah,
it did feel somewhat appropriate. I did feel bad for Steve Zahn's character in his end credits thing. It was just like, he's unmarried.
Yeah, that was sad.
Now I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah, the Vegas wedding didn't pay off for him, that's for sure. So, okay, here's really the lens that I want to explore this movie through. I will say that the last time I watched this movie prior to, just this weekend for us was when I was a senior in high school. So that's, over 10 years ago. So it'd been a long time. And what I was really, really striking to me was the relationships, the romantic relationships in the movie, particularly from the women's perspective. And here's why. You've basically got the two women, Tina, who is Charlize Theron, who is originally dating Guy, and Faye, who is Liv Tyler, dating Jimmy. And then you've got the other ones, like the bass player has a girlfriend at one point, and I actually wrote down that is the only healthy relationship in this movie is the two of them. And yes, and I'm going to tell you why I think that.
Okay, go on.
So first of all, I think it's so interesting that when Guy and Tina are first dating, it is clearly very like passionate, very like new relationship. They're talking about, I can't wait to make out, whatever. And he says, I am Spartacus. And it kind of like turns her on, right? And she's like, he's clearly very confident. He's very talented. And she likes that. And then as it goes on and his head kind of gets bigger and bigger and he starts saying like, I am Spartacus more and more, she's like kind of turned off by it. And at one point she goes to see them play and afterward, he just continues to talk about how good it was and how great he felt. And like, you can kind of just see her like, yeah, I know I was there. And I remember being 18 and thinking like, oh, that's not supportive. That's like whatever. But now as an adult, I'm like, yeah, that's really annoying.
I guess I didn't get the vibe that, and I could see, like, I can picture what you're thinking of him becoming like this overbuilding ego, but I never feel like they went far enough with it that it was like, he's got his head up his own butt so much, I never felt like that, but I can totally see where you're coming from. And I feel like you're right. They do establish, I feel like there's like one scene in the beginning where they seem like a good couple. And then I think by the second time they showed her, I was like, oh, so this isn't going to work out. He's going to end up with Liv Tyler.
Yes. Right. And it's very predictable, right? Obviously. Yes. But I do think it's so interesting that it's never bad enough that she like breaks up with him. She just kind of like starts seeing somebody else and he doesn't even notice. And he's writing her these letters and he's sending her photos of like it's not like an I love you. It's not like these are photos of me. It's like, here's my success, you know? And like, he's so wrapped up in his own shit that he doesn't even notice that she's like not responding because she's in a full blown relationship with somebody else.
That's a good point. And maybe I don't give enough credit because I was like, we see him write one letter, but you're right. In that one letter, we see him just sending pictures of what he's doing. And it would have been nice if we got to see the letter and see him not ask a single thing about her or something like that.
Yeah.
But we do just see her. She may as well do that meme of the guy giving the peace sign and fading out of existence, because she literally, there's a scene of her like golfing with the dentist and then something else with the dentist, and then they're just gone. And first of all, they do show that her in the dental chair like 7 times, and I'm like, her mouth is seriously messed up, or she's really into this dentist. And obviously it's fine that she's into the dentist, but it was like, it was weird that she just never came back.
Yeah.
I'm like waiting for a conflict of some kind where he comes back and he expects her to have been waiting for him, and you know, he has a downbeat that helps lead to the breaking up of the band because, you know, he found out she left him or something like that. And it just never happened. And
because
maybe it's somewhat realistic.
Yeah.
He made it seem like he did. Like even at the end, he says like, I thought I had a good thing.
Yeah. I mean, he just like, he's so wrapped up in his own stuff. And it's funny because I think I've seen that happen. And sometimes like the person who is so wrapped up in their own stuff doesn't understand that like they're not being an equal partner. They're not asking questions. They're not, you know, they expect to be supported, but they're not also being supportive. And I was just like, she found someone who is, you know, arguably at some point equally as successful. I mean, like a dentist, you know, like your mom would kill if you were a dentist. Like, you know, that's a pretty.
She still tells me dental school is an option.
Right. I know. Jewish mothers, man. What can you do?
Yeah.
But like, he's obviously wealthy. He's very attractive. He's kind, and he's teaching her how to golf. He's, you know, they're spending time together. They're wallpapering their kitchen. Like he is clearly as interested in her as she is in him. And Guy is just like, you know, I'm sure he thinks she's attractive, and clearly they're not right for each other, but he's just not even seeing the writing on the wall. And I'm like, oh my God, I could see myself being like, yeah, this guy's like a musician and he's doing great, but he's just so wrapped up in his own stuff. He doesn't even know if I'm alive or dead. And I think that is so unattractive. And the more he goes, I am Spartacus, it's like, bro, you're not as cool as you think you are. You know, you're not.
The movie tries very hard to make him cool too. Yeah.
I know.
I do get what you're saying. And I will say, maybe you're right in the sense that it's a very realistic way of seeing a relationship sort of deteriorate. The more unrealistic way is Jimmy and Faye, because Jimmy and Faye, you know, the first example I thought of was Jimmy and Faye, I think, are literally holding hands when they're running up and there's a crowd waiting for the Wonders, and they run and the police stop just Faye, which it was like, dude, she was just holding his hand. But the thing was the fact that she's then like shouting out for Jimmy and he just does not notice. And like, there's no scene of conflict. There's nothing. It's just, he doesn't notice. Guy notices. And at some point I was like, well, I get that you want Guy and Faye's relationship to build, but it seems weird for Jimmy to just peace out. And again, the same thing happens when they're on the plane and she's clearly sick. I was like, is she like dying? Because she was sick for several scenes.
Yeah.
It's Guy who takes care of her, not Jimmy at all. Jimmy's like, yeah, she's sick.
Well, here's the thing, right? And this is why I want to talk about this relationship also, because there's a similarity, but like a stark difference, right? So Faye is sort of the opposite of Tina. Tina's boyfriend started getting successful and ignoring her, and she was like, okay, goodbye. Faye did the opposite, where she just tried to be supportive and tried to be there and tried to back him up and be happy for him and be on his like coattails all the time. And he did not respect that. He didn't care. And I think Faye was thinking, if I could just do one more thing, if I could just be happy for him, if I could just be there in the wings, clapping for him, singing the loudest, he's going to love me. He's going to notice me. And like, I know women like that. Like I've seen that, and it doesn't work. But here you have these two men who are both wrapped up in their own heads. And obviously Jimmy was a little bit more of an egomaniac than Guy, but they've got these women who are on the back burner in their lives, and, you know, for better or for worse. And Tina said, peace out. And Faye just kept trying and trying and trying. And I have so many notes on this relationship when I was watching, because she literally sacrifices her own life to be there for him. She's clearly just touring the country with them, obviously not being paid, even though she's their costume mistress. You know, they're not making enough money for her to really be earning a living. At one point, Tom Hanks says, "Who is Faye?" And Jimmy says, and I quote, "She's sort of my girlfriend." Meanwhile, they've clearly been in a relationship for many years.
Yeah, Jimmy like claims her for part of the movie and then is like done with it. And it's sort of when I can't remember the other singer's name, Diane or whatever. It's something like that. Comes into the picture that like I remember she's sitting on his lap at one point. I was like, Jimmy, that's not cool.
Yep.
And Faye is sort of like, I'm trying to remember. I think it might be Shel Silverstein, The Giving Tree. Do you know the story?
Yep.
Because as you were describing it, I'm thinking of The Giving Tree in my head. I'm like, oh, it's so sad.
I know.
And again, I just wish it were a better actress because Faye gives a great breakup speech at the end.
Yeah.
And I should say Faye gives a great breakup speech. Liv Tyler gives an okay breakup speech.
Yeah. It would be better if it were somebody with a little bit more conviction, in the eyes.
Yes.
But I do think that as an adult woman, it was like, wow, I've been in a situation where I'm with somebody who is so self-absorbed and so obsessed with their own success that they kind of forget that I'm there. And I've also been the giving tree where it's like, maybe if I just keep giving to you, you'll reciprocate someday. And neither one of those things work. And so it was like, wow, what an interesting commentary on what it means to be a partner to someone where you need to be able to be successful and celebrate yourself, but you also can't lose sight of the other person being their own human with their own emotions and their own things going on in their life and checking in and making sure that you are, giving them time and whatnot. And I just thought it was so interesting. And that's why I think that the bass player and the other singer had the most healthy relationship in the movie because she was clearly singing That Thing You Do and whatever, but then he was in the wings singing her song and he knew all of her dance moves. And it was like, oh, they're happy for each other. They care about each other. They're being supportive. They're proud of one another and clearly expressing that. And I was like, this is the only healthy relationship in the whole freaking movie.
That's a good point. And they sort of just stopped showing it at some point. But like you said, none of them have healthy relationships. And even with each other, their relationships never seem that strong. And, I guess it makes sense. And I will say, I felt like such an idiot at the end when they literally spelled out the Wonders, One. And I had read like the synopsis beforehand, and then he calls them a one-hit wonder at the end. And I was like, Wonders. Oh, like I was like, I am an idiot. As you describe it, like, I feel like you're doing such a good job of giving it better context. And maybe it's the fact that you've seen it so many more times. And I guess that's something I want to ask too. Is this a movie that you rewatched a bunch of times? Like I know you said you hadn't watched it since high school, but when you did watch this, was this something you watched, 20 times before, and then you just had gone a long time without watching it?
No, this was probably my third time ever watching it, if I'm being honest. And I remember even in high school being like, this movie is cute. I love this song, but being very disappointed in like the romance. Like I wanted a love story. And I think now you watch it and at the end they're like, Guy and Faye married and blah, 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 and raised their kids. And it's like, that's nice, but you don't even really see it happen. But watching it now, I'm like, oh my God, this is like such a toxic situation. But no, I'm not like intimately familiar with this movie at all.
Guy and Faye definitely does feel like a happy ending, though, in the sense that it does feel like he realized by the end, like, oh, okay, so I'm not going to be a superstar. But once he realized, like, he could still have a career with music, which he's clearly passionate about, that he could still just have like a happy life, I think. And for a second, she was like, no, I'm going back to Erie, which, as you said, because I didn't really think about it, I was like, oh, she probably does have a life that she was like, maybe I'll go back to that now.
Yeah.
But I do think it did feel like they should end up together.
Yeah.
So I do think it was nice once they finally did end up together. I'm just looking at my notes and I literally have Liv Tyler distracting Lee Wooden. I feel bad. I'm like, I was very harsh.
I mean, you're not
wrong. Is Guy gonna leave Charlize Theron for Liv Tyler? Insanity. Next line. Jimmy does suck though. Like there was no time where I was like, no, Jimmy makes sense. Jimmy's a great guy. I think there's like maybe one or two moments where you see Jimmy like being somewhat appreciative or like really, being happy to be with Faye. But really, it feels so brutal at the end when it says like Jimmy, whatever, ladies, he's engaged. And he puts on this face that is like, how could they do this to me?
Ugh. That was awful. And you know what's really funny too? Like, that's another situation that you can, as a woman, find yourself in where somebody might suggest that like you and someone are even just as much as like dating and you're not, and they're like offended or like suggesting that you're engaged. It's just like somebody's reaction to that can be so gut-wrenching, and whether it's because you're emotionally attached or just like they're just offending you. And that was such a brutal moment, and the way that he like lets off in the dressing room afterward is just so gross. But what I think is so interesting is like they kind of build up the Guy and Faye relationship where, like you said, he's taking care of her when she's sick. He's concerned that she misses the limo and that the cops are holding her back. But you kind of never see the build up romantically it from either one of them, that all of a sudden it feels like, oh, you know, I've decided now I'm going to kiss you. And it's like, and then they get married. It's just very like, there's never that moment where either one of them are thinking like, is this it? Are we both feeling this? You know?
Again, I think I would have appreciated it. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? I kept waiting for the movie sort of doesn't ever really have a climax because there's never, you know, I think I'm somebody who I still remember from, you know, my very little screenwriting knowledge and my screenwriting class that like, okay, 10 to 20 minutes in, we should really have a grab you moment by now. No, not there. And I was like, okay, we're halfway through. Where's, you know, the midpoint where things are going to really rise or really sink? And I guess I was like, well, it is their songs rising up the charts, I guess, but you know, I kept waiting for these major moments and they just didn't come.
Yeah.
The most major moment you get is I do feel like that Liv Tyler speech was like a big moment. And in the same sense, I was like, but that's really still not that big a deal because I don't know, it just was so obvious by that point that it was coming.
Yeah.
I will say it does feel like, oh my God, I can't believe that it's reminding me of this. Have you seen A Cinderella Story?
Yes.
I watched it with Giselle, my wife, for obviously you know who that is, you know, but other people don't.
Yeah.
And you know, there's this moment at the end where she says, waiting for you is like waiting for rain in this drought because they're in California. And boy, am I not proud that I can quote that line. But I was like, Hillary, oh my God, I'm complimenting Hillary Duff. But Hillary Duff at least says it in a way that like she zinged him, you know what I mean?
Mhm.
Whereas
Yep,
Liv
it's a
Tyler is
great
like,
line.
I gave you all these kisses, all those kisses, and I had my eyes closed. And I should not have had my eyes so closed because I did not see you. And I was like, it's well written, but she's not saying it great. Like,
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. Also,
I'm
let's
so
talk
mad
about
at
the
myself
moment.
that Hillary Duff was my go-to for the federal line, but whatever. I'm
I'm
sorry,
so
you were
proud of
saying.
you. I'm so proud of you. And also tell Giselle I love her because you are just a better person with her in your life for this reason. Just so you know, just so it's clear, I love Giselle more than you. Um,
Fantastic.
yeah, you can let her know that. I've already told her that many times.
I've heard
So
it from other people too, but go on, go
yeah,
on.
I'm sure you have. She's definitely the better half. So let's talk about the scene where Tom Hanks, they're in the recording studio and the band breaks up. Jimmy says, I quit. And Tom Hanks is there with Guy. And he says something, how about Faye? She's pretty special, huh? And he kind of has this moment where he's like, yeah, she is pretty special. And then he like gets up and you think, okay, he's going to go to Faye. And then he sees the drum kit and he's like, actually, let me jam for a little bit first and then I'll go get Faye. And like almost misses her leaving the hotel.
Yeah, that's a good point too. And I do feel like as much as Mr. White is giving him Mr. White is Tom Hanks' character, who's giving him the credit of being like, you're the smart one guy. He's also like, so you freaking idiot. Clearly you and Faye have something at least more than this guy did with her. Which by the
Yeah.
way, Jimmy does not say he quit. He sings it.
Oh,
He's
I
like, I
apologize.
quit. It was great. Much better than the way
Yeah.
I just did. But I do feel like I still was sort of I guess you're very glad to see him get both because the fact that he is sitting at that drum kit and it is like the waning moment of the I am Spartacus because the guy's like, what's that called? And he's like, it's called I'm Spartacus. And you're like, oof, Spartacus is dead. And
Yep.
it's just nice though when he gets that moment with Del Paxton, I think was his name,
Mhm.
which makes so much more sense once I put that together, because when they were in the dressing room before for Boss Vic Koss, Kevin Pollak in a nice tiny role, they're looking at the door that has all the names written on it, and he goes, Bill Paxton's on here. Wow, Bill Paxton. And I was like, oh, it was not Bill Paxton. It
Right.
was Del Paxton. That makes much more sense in the context of the movie. I was like, I guess they're just really big fans. Maybe there was a play. Like, I was trying to figure out. I was like, maybe they really like True Lies, or I don't
That's
know.
so funny. Oh my god. Yeah, yeah. So now you get it.
Yes,
Um all right, so we've got a couple minutes left here. I want to talk about whether or not you think it is a movie that you need to see before you die. And before I say that, I will say that upon revisiting, I don't know that it's a movie that I would necessarily like run to watch again, but I do think that it's a delight. I think that song is great. I think it's a very easily digested film. Love Tom Hanks. You get a little Rita Wilson in there. You get a little Bryan Cranston in there. You get a little young baby Colin Hanks, which I was shocked to recognize. So I'm going to go ahead and say that it is a movie that you should see before you die.
football player Howie Long is also in there as his driver. There's a bunch of like really famous people in really small parts. Like I said, Kevin Pollak is in it for like 2 minutes.
Yeah. Well, Tom Hanks wrote it and directed it, question mark?
Yes,
He wrote it
and directed.
Yeah. Great. Great.
I will say, it's tough because I feel like an important thing about movie to watch before you die to me is how quotable is it, how rewatchable is it. And there's like a couple quotes I wrote down that I liked where it was, there he goes to his room to write the hit song Alone in My Principles, or
Love that.
Happy Anniversary, or Darlene, you just got promoted. You mean you're going to start paying me? I didn't say that. Will I ever quote any of those things again? Probably not. Would I ever watch this again? Not really. And like, there's a lot of times where it's like, if I watch something, I'm like, oh, Giselle, I'm now going to force you to watch this. You know what I mean? And it's like, oh, you have no choice. You're going to watch this with me now. And this, I was never like, oh, Giselle's got to see this. I was never like, I don't know. We said last week, and I thought this was a good barometer too. Would my future children have to see this movie someday? No. Like,
Okay.
and I don't mean that in like a mean way. This wasn't bad. It certainly was not unlikable. It was just, it felt like it was longer than it needed to be. And it felt like it just never blew me away. I will say, as you talked about it more, you definitely gave it more depth than I was giving it.
Yeah.
And I was looking at this as just pure, I don't want to say musical biopic because obviously it's not a real band, but I was looking at more just the story of the band, like the making of the band. And when you talk more about the depth of the relationships and the meaning behind them, I think it does paint this movie as something much more than it is on the surface. And I'm like, okay, that's a fair point. But it just never has, there's very few moments that I can look back on and be like, oh man, that was a great moment in this movie. Like, say what you want about Raiders of the Lost Ark, which is the last movie we reviewed, but you'll remember that trap in the beginning and the boulder rolling after him, or there are things you'll remember about that movie.
Yeah.
And it felt like there's never, I feel like you're looking like freaking Indiana Jones. We're still talking about that nerd. But I do feel like there's never many big moments. You know what I mean? There's very climactically happening. I will say I do like the song. I literally did just re-listen to the song before because it was like The Wonders Reunite on YouTube, and I was like, oh my god, they all got back together. Like I was like, how
It's
cool
so
is
good.
that?
It's so good. I think you're right. I think you've convinced me. I think this movie is great for like if you're an elementary school teacher and you have a snow day or something like that. You know what I mean? Or like the kids can't go outside for recess, so you're gonna put it on because it's like a fun, easygoing, But I don't think it's like life changing, and I think my future children will probably not have to watch it. Though I do think if it was on TV, I would like put it on while I cleaned, or like paid like half attention to it. Yeah, there's not a whole lot to quote. The song is great. I think they do a really good job of not beating you over the head with the song while making sure it gets stuck in your head. And I think we can all just agree that Steve Zahn is just an American treasure.
Why isn't he in more things?
I don't know. He was in those Wimpy Kid movies, but I don't think he's been in much as of late.
I've seen him in serious things. I've seen him in comedies, and he's really good in both. Like there's a movie, Rescue Dawn, with Christian Bale, and I think it's the Vietnam War, and he is so good in it.
Wow.
And I've also seen, I think it was like 8-Bit Christmas, where it's like a really stupid comedy on HBO Max. And I was like, and he's great as the dad in that. Like
Yeah.
you Daddy Daycare. He's fantastic in that.
Yep. Yeah.
This could just be an episode about Steve Zahn, and I would have been able to talk about this whole time about how much I like Steve Zahn.
He's
But
great. He's great.
I don't know. Again, is it a movie that, like, if it were on, would I be like, oh, change this? No.
Yeah.
But boy, it's not a good sign if you're like, I could have this on while I clean, or a teacher could put this on for children if it's really poor weather or something. Like,
I guess
like,
that's a low.
this is not a high bar. The bar,
That's true.
as my friend Michelle says, the bar is so low you could trip over it.
That's great. Well, I'm glad that we did this. I'm glad that we were able to talk about this movie. I'm glad I got to revisit it and kind of see through an adult lens these relationships, because I think that was very interesting. Your pick is up next.
Yes, and I have already picked out my pick. Should I say what it is now?
Go for it.
And I know it's one you haven't seen, the movie Hot Fuzz.
Okay.
Do you know anything about it?
I feel like no, but it's like a comedy, right?
It is definitely a comedy. It is I'll call it an action comedy.
Okay.
And
All right.
think you'll
say
like
no
it.
more. I'm excited. All right. That sounds great. If you have any movie requests, please submit them to the email address. Dylan, what is it?
Movies to watch before you die at gmail.com, which I know that's very long. Or you can go to anchor.fm/movies to watch, slightly shorter, and you can send us a message on there as well.
Awesome. Well, Dylan, I'm excited to talk to you next week. And thank you guys for listening.
Yeah, join us next week for Hot Fuzz.